Cole thought he had it all, a loving family and a stable life. But one night, a shocking betrayal from his wife and hidden truths from his children turned his world upside down. Leaving everything behind, he set out on a journey to heal. Will he find peace, or will the pain of betrayal haunt him forever? My name is Cole Davidson, from Jacksonville, Florida. 5 years ago, if you'd asked me how my life was, I'd have told you I had everything I wanted. A steady career, a good home, a loving wife, and 3 amazing kids. I thought we'd built a family foundation that nothing could shake. Amber and I had been together nearly 20 years, our life with a strong, steady rhythm that felt so secure, I couldn't imagine anything breaking it. Amber and I met as teenagers. We went to different high schools, but met through mutual friends at a summer bonfire on the beach at Ponte Vedra. That night is still vivid for me, the sound of the waves, the cool breeze, her laugh blending seamlessly with the crackling fire. I was drawn to her immediately, captivated by her long hair and unique style. We clicked instantly, and by the end of the night, we were sitting on the sand, talking about everything and nothing as our friends drifted away. We stayed connected, dating long distance through college, and after graduation, we both moved back to Jacksonville. It wasn't long before we married, bought a house, and started a family. Life was busy, but it was beautiful. We built traditions like family camping trips every spring and Sunday pancake breakfasts Amber would make. Our kids, Brianna, our oldest, with a strong personality and just starting college, Logan, our gentle, sweet 16-year-old who was so much like Amber, and Dylan, our 14-year-old son, full of mischief, grew up surrounded by the memories and love we'd built. Of course, our family wasn't perfect. We had our arguments, moments when we annoyed each other. Amber struggled as the kids hit their teenage years, and I worked long hours to keep up with my career. But I always believed that no matter what came our way, we'd face it together. That was our foundation. But life doesn't always go according to plan, does it? One evening, unexpectedly, Amber asked me to sit down at the kitchen table. It was late, the kids were upstairs, and the hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the room. We'd been married nearly 20 years, and in all that time, I'd never seen her look so resolute and distant. My heart sank as she looked down, avoiding my gaze. Then she started talking. She said she felt unsatisfied, even lost, in our marriage, that our life together had become a routine that left her feeling empty. It was like a loop, repeating day after day, leaving her tired of the sameness of it all. She wanted change, to live in a way that felt more true to herself. A lump formed in my throat, tension rising. And then she dropped the bombshell. She admitted she'd met someone else. I froze, struggling to process her words. Someone else, a man. How was this happening to me? His name was Rick, she said, an old college friend I vaguely remembered her mentioning over the years, in anecdotes about her college days. They'd reconnected 3 years ago at her college reunion, a reunion I'd even encouraged her to attend, thinking it'd be great for her to see old friends. But it was clear that reunion was more than a nostalgic trip down memory lane. Their friendship had rekindled into something else, something she'd hidden from me all this time. For 3 years, they'd secretly met, sharing a part of her life I didn't even know existed. The trust, comfort, and laughter we once shared had been replaced. Rick had stepped into my place, bringing her something she felt was worth leaving me, the one who'd stood by her side for 2 decades. And the hardest part? I discovered our 3 kids, Brianna, Logan, and Dylan, had known about this for a long time. They didn't want to take sides or choose between their parents, so they'd kept me in the dark. My heart sank even deeper when I learned they'd been part of the dissection. I understood they were just kids trying to navigate a complicated situation, but knowing they'd kept it from me crushed me. I'm no saint, but this felt like a slap in the face, especially since the kids knew everything. They hid it from me, and that hurt more than words could describe. After the divorce, leaving them all behind was harder than I thought, but I couldn't stay there. I packed up, left the house to Amber, and bought a small sailboat. I've been living on a modest boat docked in St. Augustine. Sailing has become my new life. Out there, alone with the water, I found peace and a strange comfort. For a long while, it was just me, the boat, and the ocean. I didn't look back, even as the kids grew up with Amber. I figured they'd reach out if they wanted to reconnect. Letting go of them was harder than I'd expected. But there was no way I could stay in that house, in that life, watching Amber and the kids carry on as if nothing had changed. I didn't think they could be so calm about it all. So, I packed my things, took only what I needed, and left the house we'd built together. She wanted stability for the kids, a familiar place where they'd grown up, where they'd continue to grow. So, I agreed. With no ties left, I bought a small sailboat, a modest but sturdy vessel I could call my own. I docked it in St. Augustine, not far from Jacksonville, but far enough to start fresh. St. Augustine, with its historic charm and salty air, became my quiet refuge. Growing up near the water, I'd never spent much time on it. Now, it was my entire world. Sailing became my new rhythm, a way to heal my wounds. I learned every part of that boat, how to handle it in a storm, how to read the tides, even how to fix things when they inevitably broke. Out there, it was just me, the boat, and a vast, open sky. Solitude became a balm. Every morning, I'd watch the sun rise over the Atlantic, casting an orange glow over the water. I'd sip my coffee in the cool morning air, listening to the waves lapping against the hull. The ocean soothed my mind, silencing the noise of the past. Some days, I'd sail for hours with no destination, letting the wind take me where it wanted. I started calling it drift therapy, letting the sea lead me wherever it wished, as if that was the only power I had left. For months, maybe even years, it was just me and the ocean. I didn't dwell much on reconnecting with Amber or the kids. They had each other, and I figured they'd reach out if they wanted to. Occasionally, I'd get a call or message from one of the kids, usually a quick update on Dylan's soccer game, Logan's college applications, Brianna's new job. I appreciated the updates, but I didn't push for more. I thought I'd made my peace, but in truth, I hadn't. They never asked how I was doing, not once after all those years. It's cruel, isn't it? After months of unrelenting fatigue and pain that refused to go away, I finally admitted it was time to see a doctor. The exhaustion and ache had started seeping into everything I did, even my peaceful days on the water that I once loved. So, reluctantly, I drove up to Baltimore, Maryland. Returning there was strange. Baltimore is filled with memories, a place Amber and I once explored together. I could still picture us hand in hand, strolling along the cobblestone streets of Fells Point, laughing as we dodged crowds at Lexington Market or wandering through the quirky shops in Hampton. Amber had a way of making everything brighter, more vibrant. I remember one time in Little Italy, we stumbled into a tiny restaurant where we shared a crab cake so perfectly seasoned that we talked about it for years afterward. In Baltimore, we'd spend afternoons at the Baltimore Museum of Art, where Amber was mesmerized by the paintings, immersing herself in each brushstroke, while I enjoyed hearing the stories behind them. We'd also stroll along the inner harbor, watching the sunset shimmer over the water, enjoying the cool ocean breeze. Those peaceful evenings at quaint sidewalk cafes, the taste of crab cakes, her laughter, all these memories rushed back to me as I returned to the city. But my reverie ended when the cab driver told me we'd arrived at Johns Hopkins Hospital, one of the country's renowned medical centers. Sitting in the exam room with the doctor, processing the diagnosis of early-stage cancer, I felt a mix of disbelief and fear. Cancer? How would I face this alone? I hadn't even begun to wrap my head around it. My mind felt scattered, numb. Then, by chance, Amber passed by the doctor's office. She overheard the conversation between the doctor and me, words that sent a chill through her. After the doctor left, she waited at the doorway. When I stepped out, she looked straight at me, her face carrying a question she didn't need to ask. "Cole? What are you doing here?" she asked, feigning innocence. "Women." I brushed past her, responding with a bitterness I couldn't hide. "Amber, we're nothing to each other anymore. I don't owe you an explanation." "Men." Without waiting for a reply, I walked away, leaving her standing there, stunned in the hallway. One day, my phone rang. It was Brianna, my oldest daughter. I hadn't heard from her in a while, so I answered, assuming she was calling to check in. Our relationship had been strained since the divorce, but she still called now and then, usually keeping our conversations light, just giving me updates on her life or checking in. This time, though, I sensed something different. There was a strange weight to her voice, something heavy and unusual. She told me that Amber and Rick had a daughter, a little girl named Haley. I was taken aback. For some reason, I hadn't considered that Amber might start a new family. I'd never thought about it that way. Brianna went on to say that Haley was gravely ill and needed a kidney transplant. And, guess what? They hoped I would get tested to see if I could be a match. Saying I was shocked doesn't cover it. Anger and pain surged back to the surface, as if it had all happened yesterday. The people who had shut me out of their lives were now asking me to step up and help their child. I told Brianna I'd need to think about it, then hung up. I spent that night staring at the stars, lost in the vastness above, wondering how I ended up here, at this place, at this time, with such a weighty decision. The stars were still, unmoving, offering no comfort or guidance. They were simply there, distant and cold, while I clung to the deck of my small boat, searching for answers to questions I wasn't sure I wanted to ask. It was humbling to be out there alone. The waves lapped against the boat in a steady, comforting rhythm, breaking the silence. It was as if the ocean itself was breathing, reminding me that, despite everything, I was still here, still alive. The sound of the water, mixed with the cool night air, felt like an embrace, as if nature itself was cradling my turmoil, accepting my confusion and pain. Out here, I could find some form of peace, even if only temporary, as if the sea was whispering, "I understand. Stay here, I will always be here to heal you." The sea said. Dawn gradually painted soft hues of pink and gold across the water. It was as if the world was waking up in gentle stages, pulling itself out of sleep, just as I was slowly pulling myself out of the night's tangled thoughts. The light stretched across the waves, touching each crest with a warm glow, and for a brief moment, everything felt completely still. I could hear the gentle call of seagulls above, their cries echoing in the early morning calm, like a quiet serenade to welcome a new day. It brought me a small comfort after a long night. I hadn't realized I'd drifted off to sleep out there on the deck, lost in the heavy thoughts of the night. But as the first rays of sunlight hit my face, I felt a strange sense of renewal, as if the night had lifted part of my burden. The cool breeze brushed against my face, carrying the familiar sense of salt and seaweed, smells that reminded me of simpler days, days filled with happiness. Watching the seagulls gliding over the water, I thought back to the mornings I used to spend with my kids on the beach, when they were young and eager to explore the world. Brianna was always the first to wake, pulling me along to the shore so we could watch the sunrise together. She had a boundless curiosity, a spark that made her want to know everything about the world. Logan would join us a bit later, quieter, more introspective, standing close to me and watching the waves with a focused gaze she'd had since she was little. And Dylan, still half asleep, would stumble down last, a bundle of energy waiting to burst awake with the day. Amber showed up at the dock one unexpectedly warm afternoon, the air heavy with the scent of salt and seaweed. I was tidying the deck, part of my daily routine, when I looked up and saw her standing there. She walked over without hesitation, bringing a young girl with her, someone I assumed was Haley. I hadn't met her before, only heard about her through Brianna's tense phone call. Haley looked up at me with wide eyes, a blend of innocence and curiosity that children often have. But I barely registered her presence, all my attention was focused on Amber and her unexpected request. It was astonishing that she'd left me years ago, and now she was here, hoping I'd help her. She tried to speak to me, but all I could think about was how easily she and my own children had cast me aside. The image of them, cold and detached, pushing me out of their lives, I couldn't forget. And now, they wanted something from me? I was angry, and I made sure she knew it. I took a deep breath, trying to keep calm. The years hadn't erased the hurt, and seeing her there, with that hopeful look in her eyes, brought it all back. "Amber, you can't just show up and ask for my help." "I need time to think about this," I said to her. Men. I'd come to the sea to be soothed, to let the waves quiet my mind. Only the ocean could heal the deep wounds I was carrying. Amber showed up at the dock one unexpectedly warm afternoon, the air heavy with the scent of salt and seaweed. I was tidying the deck, part of my daily routine, when I looked up and saw her standing there. She walked over without hesitation, bringing a young girl with her, someone I assumed was Haley. I hadn't met her before, only heard about her through Brianna's tense phone call. Haley looked up at me with wide eyes, a blend of innocence and curiosity that children often have. But I barely registered her presence, all my attention was focused on Amber and her unexpected request. It was astonishing that she'd left me years ago, and now she was here, hoping I'd help her. She tried to speak to me, but all I could think about was how easily she and my own children had cast me aside. The image of them, cold and detached, pushing me out of their lives, I couldn't forget. And now, they wanted something from me? I was angry, and I made sure she knew it. I took a deep breath, trying to keep calm. The years hadn't erased the hurt, and seeing her there, with that hopeful look in her eyes, brought it all back. I'd come to the sea to be soothed, to let the waves quiet my mind. Only the ocean could heal the deep wounds I was carrying. When I returned to the dock, I'd hoped Amber and Haley would be gone. But she was still there, standing right where I'd left her, and this time, she looked more determined than ever. She held a handcuff in her hand, and before I could react, she locked one end to her wrist and the other to my boat's railing. She had chained herself to my boat. My heart pounded with disbelief and anger as I witnessed the scene. Amber, standing firm, refused to take no for an answer. Haley, wide-eyed and confused, had to witness the chaotic scene. It was surreal. Amber's determination had crossed a line, and it was clear she'd do anything to make me agree. Bystanders began to gather, their curious stares quickly turning into worried murmurs as they realized what was happening. It didn't take long for the Coast Guard to arrive, drawn by the growing commotion at the marina. Amber was unfazed. She looked at me with a desperate expression, her voice trembling as she pleaded. She kept saying it, even as the Coast Guard tried to convince her. Eventually, they persuaded her to unchain herself, but not before she'd made her point. Her voice cracked, her words a mix of desperation and determination. I could feel every eye in the crowd on me, waiting for my response. She wanted me to agree to be tested to see if I could donate a kidney to her daughter. How cruel she was, to say. Amber emphasized, her voice breaking yet firm. I felt a deep bitterness rise within me, a sharp pain as I realized she was willing to take this story as far as it could go to manipulate the situation. Amber knew exactly where to strike, knowing how to touch the deepest parts of my guilt and sense of duty, using her words to paint me as a villain if I refused to help her daughter. She was relying on my conscience, hoping I'd feel so cornered by the weight of her words that I'd have no choice but to agree. Anger simmered beneath my calm exterior, but I could feel the guilt she intended to stir creeping in, just as she planned. I knew Amber, she'd always been perceptive, able to read people, understanding their weaknesses. She once used that intuition for good, to support me, to encourage me, to strengthen our family. But now, she was wielding it as a weapon, framing the decision in a way that seemed like the only moral choice for me. I felt like a pawn in her strategy, backed into a corner with no escape. In a fleeting moment, I looked at Haley, sitting quietly nearby, unaware of the complexities unfolding around her. Her wide eyes were filled with curiosity, innocence, and a quiet vulnerability that stirred something deep within me. Haley hadn't asked to be here, hadn't chosen to be caught in the crossfire of our past. She was just a child, facing a world she didn't fully understand, a world full of adult-created chaos. Though I wanted to hold on to my anger, I couldn't ignore the innocent life of a child hanging in the balance. I could feel the weight of Amber's gaze, the force of her request pressing down on me. And despite the resentment I held for her for making my life as it was now, I knew she was looking to me to make the final decision that would change everything, for better or worse. A small voice broke the heavy silence between Amber and me. I turned and saw a man, sharply dressed, approaching us. His polished shoes, neatly pressed slacks, and expensive coat seemed out of place at the casual marina. Hearing Haley call him Dad confirmed what I already suspected. This was Rick, the man who had not only destroyed my marriage but was now Haley's father. The irony was almost too much. Here he was, this man who had broken my family, now coming to beg me to save his daughter. Rick stepped forward, managing a polite smile that only deepened my sense of emptiness. There was a stiffness in his expression, an unease that made me wonder if he felt any shame, the kind he deserved. Standing close to me, he extended his hand, but I didn't take it. His face shifted slightly, and for a brief moment, the cold facade cracked, revealing a hint of vulnerability. Rick's brow furrowed, his voice tightening with strain. I silently met Rick's gaze, his expression pleading and helpless, like a man facing his own failures with no way to fix them. This strong man now looked like a child who'd made a terrible mistake. His sincerity softened something inside me. After all, I was a father too, and I understood that feeling all too well. If I were in his shoes, I would do the same. In the end, I gave in. It wasn't an easy decision. In fact, every step I took toward the hospital felt like a fight with myself. But deep down, there was still a sliver of something left for Amber, and no matter the bitterness, I couldn't watch an innocent child lose her chance at life. After countless sleepless nights, gazing up at the stars, I made the choice to get tested. In the waiting room, I sat with clenched fists, listening to my own heartbeat pound in my chest. I thought of backing out countless times, but when the doctor came out, holding the results and informing me that I was a match, I knew I had crossed a line I could never return from. Despite the doctor's warnings about risks, post-surgery pain, and a grueling recovery period, I had decided to go through with it, for the innocent child, and maybe for that lingering feeling I held for the person who had left me. The surgery was harder than I'd expected. Lying in the hospital bed, I had endless time to think, my heart heavy yet strangely at ease. I wondered if I'd made the right choice. Looking at Haley, Rick and Amber's daughter, lying in the bed beside me, recovering from her own ordeal, I felt an inexplicable sense of peace. I knew that by donating my kidney to her, I was giving her a second chance at life. But it felt strange, lying there, risking everything for the daughter of Amber and another man. Yet, I reminded myself that Haley hadn't chosen any of this, she had no say in her family or where she was born. That thought helped me push through. I couldn't be the reason a child lost her chance at life. Haley was innocent and didn't deserve to be dragged into the chaos created by adults. The surgery was more grueling than I could have imagined. Every muscle, every small movement, reminded me of the pain I'd buried in my past. Lying there in the quiet hospital room, I had all the time in the world to reflect on this decision, my feelings a mix of relief and heaviness. Looking at Haley, sleeping peacefully after the procedure, I felt a pain of sadness and a strange urge to fight, knowing this child was in far greater pain than I was. By giving Haley my kidney, I'd given her a life she might never have had otherwise. It was strange, realizing I'd risked everything to save the child of those who betrayed me, but I knew in my heart it was the right thing to do. Haley hadn't chosen her parents or her circumstances, and that thought helped me rise above the bitterness. Some nights, lying awake, I wondered if this was the only way to find meaning in my life again. The anger and hurt were still there, but somehow, this decision gave me a semblance of peace. Looking at Haley's innocent face, I saw the faces of my own children, memories of when they were young and safe in my arms. Haley was just a child, undeserving of the cruelty inflicted on her by the mistakes of the adults around her. As I lay there, Amber entered the room, her expression softened. She walked slowly to my bedside, not saying a word, only looking at me with an unspoken message I couldn't quite decipher. The silence between us held so much wounds that would never truly heal. Returning to the boat after days in the hospital, I found myself lost and thought about everything that had happened. The once quiet nights by the shore no longer held the same peace they used to, they now felt heavy with a sorrowful uncertainty. I had sacrificed more than most people would, especially given everything Amber and Rick had put me through. It was hard to swallow that anger. But I reminded myself this wasn't about Amber or Rick, it was about Haley. She was just a child, and she deserved a chance at life. No matter what her parents had done, no matter what I had endured, I couldn't let my resentment deny an innocent child her future. I thought of Brianna, Logan, and Dylan, my children, the ones I'd do anything to protect. Haley wasn't my child, but deep down, I knew that helping her was the right thing to do. Now, each time I set sail, my thoughts churn within me. If faced with this decision again, honestly, I don't know if I'd make the same choice. Would you be willing to give a part of yourself to those who abandoned you? Or is it better to walk away, leave it all behind, and see it as a lesson for them to learn on their own? Would I really let a child pay for the sins of Amber and Rick? Yet part of me wonders if, by doing so, I allowed myself to be taken advantage of once again. So here I am, with the waves and the wind as my only companions, still searching for answers. If you were me, would you have done the same? Would you give part of yourself to those who let you down? Or is it better to step away, let the child struggle with their illness, and perhaps miss their chance at life? I suppose that's something everyone has to ask themselves at some point. Is it worth sacrificing a part of yourself for those who've disappointed you? Or is it sometimes better to let them face the consequences alone? Maybe the answer isn't black or white, right or wrong. Perhaps it's this ambiguity that makes life rich and mysterious, leaving us to keep walking forward, even when we don't know what lies ahead.